The first time Officer Daniel Miller tried to ruin my life, he did it with a smile on his face and a little plastic bag in his hand, standing in the middle of a sunny, quiet street like he had all the power in the world, and I was just another story he would write in his report later. "A beautiful woman like you," he said, leaning on the door of my Aston Martin like it belonged to him. "It would be a shame to see all this potential go to waste in a prison cell." Then he lifted that bag of white powder closer to my face and offered me a private arrangement at his place next door to make it all disappear, and in that moment I knew two things at once. He thought I was trapped, and he had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. My name is Isabella Vance, and by the time this whole thing was over, that same cop who tried to frame me on my own street would be led away in handcuffs, his supervisor would follow right behind him, and an entire police department would be forced under federal oversight. But it started like 100 other stories you and I have heard on the news, and maybe you know exactly what I mean. Before I get into it, do me one favor, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because this is not just my story. This is about all the times people like him get away with it. Except this time, he picked the wrong black woman. That afternoon felt like a reward, like the universe had finally handed me a deep breath. I had just moved into Oak Ridge Estates, one of those neighborhoods with manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and people who wave without ever really asking your name. To my neighbors, I was the woman with the Aston Martin, a tech entrepreneur maybe, or somebody's heiress, someone who made it or married it. Either way, they kept a polite distance. They saw the red silk dresses, not the late-night secure calls, not the years of training, not the quiet knowledge of how ugly the world can get. My actual job sits behind a wall of acronyms and classification, but I'll put it this way. When things go very wrong in very delicate places, people like me get plane tickets. I speak 4 languages, can break down a geopolitical crisis like a puzzle, and I am very, very good at staying calm when the room catches fire. And yes, I bought the house next to a quiet, harmless-looking cop on purpose. Proximity to law enforcement is a nice disguise when you live a life like mine. That day, I was not thinking about any of that. The sky was clear. The V12 engine was purring, my playlist was on, and for once my brain was not spinning through contingency plans. I slipped into that red silk dress because it made me feel like a person, and not just a tool for the government. Slid behind the wheel of my Aston Martin DB12 Volante, and told myself I would just enjoy a slow drive to a small gallery downtown. No mission, no handlers, no encrypted briefings. Just wind in my hair and 30 minutes of peace. I still remember the exact moment the red and blue lights popped up in my rearview mirror, how they cut across that warm, honey-colored afternoon like somebody had taken a knife to it. You know that feeling, right? Whether you have done something wrong or not, your stomach drops. Your brain starts scanning. Speed limit, turn signal plates, seatbelt, trying to find the mistake. I checked my speed, 25 on the dot. I replayed the stop sign at the corner in my head. I knew I had come to a full 3-second stop. I knew my plates were clean, my registration was up to date. There was no reason for those lights, not a legitimate one. Still, I signaled ease to the curb, turned the music down, and put my hands on the wheel where he could see them. What Officer Miller didn't know was that the second I hit the brakes, my car woke up. I had installed a custom surveillance suite in that Aston Martin, front and rear cameras, side mirror cams, an interior wide-angle lens, multiple microphones tied into the cabin, audio, GPS, even environmental sensors. On paper, it was for personal security. In reality, it was my insurance policy against exactly this sort of thing, the kind of thing I'd watched happen to too many people who did not have the tools to fight back. He got out of his cruiser with that lazy swagger you see on guys who have never really had to answer for anything, a man in his late 30s with a thick neck crammed into a uniform collar, a face stuck somewhere between boredom and disgust. We had met once in passing when I moved in. A little wave across the driveway, one of those neighborly moments that lasted 3 seconds too long because I could feel his eyes crawling over me. That day there was no license and registration, please. He leaned an elbow on the polished green door of my car like he was leaning on a bar and said, well, fancy car for this neighborhood, you must be new money." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation wrapped in fake charm. "Good afternoon, officer," I said, keeping my voice even. "Is there a problem?" "The problem," he replied, pushing off the car, "is that you rolled through that stop sign back at Maple and Crestwood." He was lying and we both knew it, but the only version that mattered on that sidewalk was his. I'm pretty sure I came to a full stop. I answered, still calm, still polite. He laughed under his breath, that humorless little chuckle some people use when they want you to know they are not listening. That's what they all say. He shrugged. Then he added the line he had probably used 100 times. We've been having trouble around here lately. Burglaries, drugs, people who don't quite fit in. He let that sit between us, heavy and poisonous. Then he sniffed theatrically and said, I smell marijuana coming from your vehicle, which gives me probable cause to search, so go ahead and step out for me. There was no smell, my car's air sensors would later prove it, but right then on that street none of that mattered. If I argued too hard, I knew exactly how quickly non-compliant could replace polite in his head. So I took a slow breath, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out into the hot, perfect afternoon, moving slow enough that even the car's interior camera could catch every frame. He walked me off the pavement onto the manicured grass, positioned me where I could see my car, but not reach it, and told me to keep my hands where he could see them. Then he started searching. No gloves, no professionalism, just big hands rummaging through my center console, tossing my sunglasses aside, rifling my glove box, crumpling documents that meant nothing to him but a lot to me. From the outside, it looked like routine police work. From my vantage point, it looked a whole lot like a man looking for an excuse to do what he had already decided to do. When he came around to the passenger side, I watched him in the reflection of my side mirror, my mind doing the kind of tracking I used overseas. Hand movements, body language, angles, all of it. He patted the seat once, then his right hand dipped into the cargo pocket of his own pants, and when that hand came back from under my seat, it was no longer empty. He stood up, holding a small clear bag full of white powder, lifted it into the sunlight like some kind of twisted prize, and turned toward me with a triumphant smile. Well, well, he said louder, just in case any passing driver might hear, looks like I was right to be suspicious. This changes things. This changes things a lot. He walked back toward me with the bag dangling from his fingers, and my heart was beating hard, but not from guilt. It was rage. It was the knowledge that if I were just any other black woman in a nice car that day, this might be the beginning of a nightmare with no witnesses and no way out. You know what this is, right? He asked, swinging the bag between us. Looks like cocaine to me. That's a felony, ma'am. Serious time years. He stretched the word years out like he was savoring it. He talked about the quantity like he was some expert, like he wasn't the one who had just pulled it out of his own pocket. He waited for me to cry or beg or fall apart. I did none of those things. I just looked at him steady and silent, and I didn't even glance at the bag. That silence unnerved him more than if I'd started screaming. He shifted closer, bringing with him the smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne, and his voice dropped. Look, he said, I don't want to ruin your life, all right, a beautiful woman like you. His eyes slid down my dress again. It'd be a shame to see all this potential go to waste behind bars. He raised the baggie between two fingers, wagged it like a toy. Felony possession carries a hefty sentence, but maybe... He leaned in so close I could see the pores on his nose. Maybe we could find a more neighborly solution. You and me, my place is right next door after all. We work something out and this bag just disappears. He was not just corrupt, he was a predator, and this was not his first time running this disgusting script. You could hear it in how casual he was, how practiced his little pauses were. I let his words hang in the warm air for a beat, let the cabin microphones capture every word, every nasty little neighborly implication. He took my silence for fear, his grin widening. He thought he had me boxed in, his bed or a prison cell. So he pushed, what's it gonna be? We gonna be good neighbors? Or do I need to call this in and have you cuffed and stuffed? When I finally spoke, my voice was soft, almost gentle, but I could hear the steel in it. I believe I said that I will choose a third option. His brow furrowed just a little, his brain not quite catching up. I glanced toward my handbag, still on the passenger seat. My identification is in my purse, I said. May I retrieve it? That tiny word, identification, sounded safe to him. He puffed his chest back up, eager to feel in control again. Yeah, sure, he said, but do it slowly. No sudden moves. I walked back to the car, every step measured. My fingers slipped into the bag past my wallet and closed around a stiff leather credential case. When I turned back to him, I was holding it in front of me. You asked for my ID, Officer Miller, I said, and I opened the case. On one side, my photo. On the other, embossed in unmistakable gold, the seal of the Central Intelligence Agency with my name and Directorate of Operations printed below. I watched his smirk not just fade, but completely shatter. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes jumped from the badge to my face and back again like his brain refused to process what it was seeing. The woman in the silk dress, the new money neighbor he thought he could break, was suddenly a federal officer with a higher clearance than he could imagine. I didn't raise my voice, didn't step toward him. I just started listing calmly what he had done. You lied about a traffic violation. I said you fabricated probable cause by claiming you smelled marijuana that was never there. You conducted an illegal search, you planted evidence in my vehicle, and you attempted to coerce a federal officer into a sexual arrangement in exchange for not filing false felony charges. Every one of those acts is a crime, and every single second of it is on video and audio from 5 different angles. His fingers started to shake. The baggie in his hand trembled, then slipped and fell onto the grass at his feet. He stammered. There's been a misunderstanding. A terrible mistake. There is no misunderstanding. I cut in my voice cold. Now you are going to do exactly what I say. You are going to walk back to your vehicle, you are going to clear this traffic stop on your terminal, then you are going to drive to a public place and wait. You are not going home, you are not going to the precinct. And if you try to access any file or talk to any colleague about this before you hear from a federal agent, I will consider it an attempt to obstruct a federal investigation. Is that clear? All that bravado, that smug little power trip was gone. He nodded like a scolded teenager, turned and stumbled back to his cruiser, his shoulders hunched. A moment later, I watched my plate disappear from his screen, the lights on his car blink off, and he pulled away without another word. The immediate danger was gone, but the real work was just beginning. That is the thing about people like him. They count on fear and shame keeping their victims quiet, count on the system backing their word over yours, and most of the time they are right. This time he'd picked somebody whose entire job is documenting building cases and pulling threads until a whole rotten sweater comes apart. I got behind the wheel, drove a couple of blocks away, parked under a tree, and made 2 calls. The first was to Leo Martinez, my top technical specialist. Leo, I said when he answered, it's me. Activate Protocol Crimson on the Aston Secure the last 20 minutes. I want redundant copies on Langley and 1 firewalled on your personal system. Label it Project Nightingale. He did not waste time asking what had happened. The code word told him enough. On it, he said, his voice suddenly very sober. You'll have a clean package in a few hours. The second call was to Marcus Thorne, civil rights attorney with a reputation big enough that city officials say his name like a weather report they don't want to hear. Marcus, I said when he picked up, it's Isabella Code 4 Personal. That was our shorthand for something ugly done to me by a state or local authority. He went dead serious and said, send me everything, I'll clear my schedule. Yeah, that happened. The calm neighbor cop who thought he could trade my freedom for a night next door had just accidentally opened the door to a federal hammer and a legendary lawyer. I could tell you in detail how Leo synced the 5 camera angles, zoomed in on the exact moment Miller's hand dipped into his pocket before he found the drugs. How he isolated the audio of that lie about smelling marijuana, cross-referenced it with the car's environmental sensors that showed 0 smoke particles, enhanced every disgusting word of that neighborly proposition. I could describe the hours he spent digging into Miller's stop history, discovering the pattern of young women, mostly women of color, always alone, pulled over for vague minor offenses that are almost impossible to fight later. I could walk you through how Marcus's investigators sat across from those women Miller had targeted before me. Maria, the nursing student, Keisha, the graphic designer, the single mom leaving her diner shift, how their voices shook at first, how they all said some version of, I tried to report him, but they made me feel crazy. And I could tell you exactly how each of those complaints, all 7 of them, ended up dismissed by the same man, Captain Robert Davis Miller's supervisor, and the head of their internal review board, the guy who was supposed to catch the bad apples but somehow never found one. All of that happened over days and weeks, a slow burn of anger, paperwork, interviews, digital digging. In the middle of it, Miller was coming apart at the seams. A man who had spent his whole career wielding fear suddenly found himself swallowed by it. Every phone call, every knock on his door felt like the end. And fear makes people sloppy. One night he drove his personal truck, not his cruiser, across town, parked outside Keisha's building, and started buzzing her apartment, pounding on the glass lobby door, shouting threats for the whole complex to hear. "You better not be talking to anyone. You keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you." What he didn't know was that 2 blocks away, Leo and a small surveillance team were sitting in a nondescript van with a camera on a long lens and a powerful microphone pointed right at him, recording every slurred threat, every kick at that door. It was witness tampering on tape, a desperate man digging his own grave a little deeper. That recording changed the game. Marcus called a meeting with the women who had come forward, played them the audio of Miller screaming at Keisha, and I watched the fear on their faces harden into something else. Resolve, anger, a kind of shared courage. "This isn't just about damages anymore," Marcus told them. "This makes you key witnesses in a federal criminal investigation." For the first time in years, they believed that maybe, just maybe, the system would have to listen. The plan unfolded in 2 lanes. Publicly, Marcus filed a massive class action lawsuit against Miller, Captain Davis, and the Oak Ridge Police Department, laying out a pattern of harassment, discrimination, and deliberate failure to discipline. Privately, he bundled Leo's evidence: my video, the sensor data, the complaint history, the financial records Leo found linking union charity money to Miller, the new witness tampering recording, into a neat package for the U.S. Attorney and the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. When Marcus stepped in front of the cameras on the courthouse steps with those 7 women behind him, the city paid attention. He talked about a horrifying pattern of abuse, about a system that protected a predator instead of the public. He said we had recordings, digital evidence proof. He did not show the video. That was bait. It worked. Within hours, the police union president, Frank Rizzo, stood in front of his own microphone, surrounded by officers with folded arms, and Captain Davis looking like he wanted to melt into the concrete. Rizzo called the women liars, called Marcus an ambulance chaser, called Miller a decorated 10-year veteran and a hero. He said very loudly that they had no proof that this was a disgusting, baseless attack. He promised they would fight with every resource they had. He tied his entire union's credibility to Miller in front of every camera in town. I watched that press conference from my living room with Leo sitting beside me, laptop open, my video file queued up. When Rizzo said no proof, Leo looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Is it time?" he asked. I watched Rizzo puff his chest at the cameras one last time and said, "It's time. Burn them down." With one click, Leo sent the full unedited recording from my car, multiple angles, clear audio, timestamps, everything, to every major local and national newsroom, and scheduled it to hit the big social platforms at the same time. Within minutes, a local station cut into regular programming with a warning. "What you are about to see is disturbing," the anchor said, and then the world watched my Saturday afternoon. They saw Miller approach my car, heard him lie about the stop sign, watched him claim he smelled marijuana, watched his hand go into his pocket, then come out from under my seat with the baggie. They watched him stand over me and say, "A beautiful woman like you, we can find a neighborly solution." They heard him offer to trade my freedom for a private arrangement. And then they watched me open my credentials and watched his whole world collapse in real time. There was no way to spin it, no way to say it was misunderstood. His own words convicted him. Social media exploded. People who usually rush to say, "We don't know the whole story," were forced to stare at the whole story in 4K. The hashtag with his name and predator attached to it spread like wildfire. Clips of Rizzo defending him were played side by side with the footage of him planting evidence and trying to coerce me. And if you want to talk about poetic justice, that was it right there. By 8 the next morning, 2 black SUVs with federal plates pulled up outside Oak Ridge PD. Agents from the FBI and the DOJ Civil Rights Division walked through those doors and didn't ask permission. They served warrants, seized files, grabbed hard drives. One team went to Miller's house, where they found him sitting in the dark like a man who had already watched his own funeral. Another walked Captain Davis out of his office in handcuffs in front of his own officers. Rizzo tried to bluster to talk about due process, but it was too late. The same cameras he'd invited the day before came back to capture the walk of shame. In the end, the courtroom part almost felt like a formality. Faced with my video, Leo's data, the testimony of those women, and his own drunken threats outside Keisha's apartment, Miller took a plea: 14 years in federal prison. Davis got 10 for his part in the conspiracy and the cover-up. The charity money Leo tracked led to more resignations and investigations inside the union. The city settled the class action with the women for a record amount, issued public apologies, and signed onto a federal consent decree that put the whole department under years of oversight and reform. I never had to take the stand. My work was done the minute I hit the brakes that afternoon. A week after sentencing, I sat on my patio with a cup of tea, the Aston Martin shining quietly in the driveway like any other car, and I thought about how close this came to being just another story of a woman framed, disbelieved, and swallowed by the system. He saw a black woman in a nice car and assumed victim, assumed easy prey. What he got instead was the consequence, not just for himself, but for every person who had looked the other way while he hunted at the edges of their town. And now I want to ask you, what part of this hit you the hardest? The moment he planted the drugs and smiled the way 7 complaints were buried by his boss, or the fact that it took a CIA badge and a luxury car to finally make anyone listen? Do you believe one person can really crack a rotten system, or was this just a perfect storm that almost never happens? Tell me what you think in the comments. Tell me if you have seen things like this where you live stories that never made the news. And if you want more real stories about power abuse and justice, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Because people like Officer Miller count on silence, and the more we talk about what really happens on quiet streets like mine, the harder it gets for them to hide.